Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws. Today we're looking at Book 17 of the Spirit of the Laws, which is, I think it is uh, um, the fourth book within the third part, which has dealt with climate of the Spirit of Laws. The third part is almost the climate part of it, climate, and then later geography, right? How physical environment, the environment, we could say, the environment shapes the um, the behavior of people, human beings, human nature, and therefore it shapes what is possible politically. Um, so let's go look to it. How the laws of political servitude are related to the natures of climate. So if the first one was civil, then next the previous one in 15 was civil servitude, uh, 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 domestic servitude, now political servitude. And what means political servitude means here how they're slaves. In other words, the idea of slavery, of political slavery, loss of liberty, despotism, right? Chapter 1, political servitude. Political servitude depends no less on the nature of the climate than do civil and domestic servitude, as will be shown. The difference, chapter 2, the differences between peoples in relations to courage, right? Again, this is the thing that Aristotle himself kind of argued in Book 7 of the Politics, about that um, something about, Europeans were courageous and the Asians lacked it, and therefore we have already said that the great heat, it venerates the strength and courage of men, and that there is in cold climates a certain strength in body and spirit that makes men capable of long, arduous, great, and daring action. This is noticeable not only from nation to nation, but even from one part of the same country to another. The peoples of northern China are more courageous than those of the south. Those of the people of southern Korea are not as courageous as those of the north. Therefore, one must not be surprised by the cowardice of a people of hot climates, has almost always made them slaves, and that the courage of people of the cold climates have kept them free. This is the effect that derives from its natural cause. It has also been found to be true in America. The most despotic empires of Mexico and Peru were near the equator, and almost all the free peoples there were still are towards the poles. In other words, there's more autonomy and freedom of the tribes among the American Indians and the native peoples of north are north to the poles. The closer north you are, center and the equator, the most despotic there is. Right. Um, on the climate of Asia, chapter 3, accounts tell us that from the north of Asia, the vast continent extending from about 40th parallel to the pole and the borders of Muscovy to the Eastern Ocean, has a very cold climate. That this immense terrain is derived from west to east by a chain of mountains that put Siberia to the north and the greater Tartars into the south. The climate of Siberia is so cold that although the Russians have settlements there along the Irish, they cultivate nothing there. That nothing grows in this country but a small fir tree and shrubs. That the natives of the country are divided into destitute tribes, like those of Canada. That the reasons for this cold is, on the other hand, the elevation of terrain, and on the other, that it goes south. It goes from south to north, the mountainous levels. Out in the north, wind blows everywhere unobstructed, and that when this wind makes the Nova Zemlya uninhabitable, blows in Siberia, it makes it a wasteland. In Europe, on the other hand, the mountains of Norway and Lapland are marble bullocks shielding the countries of the north from this wind. And thus Stockholm, which is about 59 degrees latitude, the terrain can produce fruit, grain, and plants. and that the around the Alba, which is at the same degrees north, and that as the 36 and 46 degree are the silver mines and the terrains quite fur. So he's describing how climate and terrain interact, and how mountain ranges will will shape how climate works. Right? The poles are cold. The argument is right. The temperature poles are cold. The center is warm, but and the winds move from hot to cold and cold to hot. What ends up happening is that this change from cold to hot causes circulation of water, causing winds. Also cause winds. Circulation. Remember, water and air are same product as different temperatures, right? Um, what ends up happening is there is this that mountains can shape the way rain and climate happens, and therefore creates, like, this is why the deserts, the great deserts that happen right out of the Rocky Mountains, right? The land immediately after the Rocky Mountains, although even plains, are less mountainous than those right next to the Mississippi River area, right? So therefore, this is one of the great. The same thing in North and Africa, right? The African plain that all of a sudden has a barrier, that there's this great desert barrier, right, near the equator. And then underneath that, there's bounteous climate there with food, much there being done. So, okay, let's continue. We see further accounts. The Greater Tartary, which is to the south of Siberia, is also very cold. That the country is not cultivated. That only pastures for herds are found there. That, as in Iceland, some brushes are not, but not trees grow there. Uh, um, that close to China and the Mongols there are some countries where a kind of millet grows, which but where neither wheat nor rice can ripen. That there are scarcely any spots in Chinese Tartary at the 43rd, 44th, and 45th parallel there that does not freeze 7 or 8 months a year, so that it is as cold as Iceland, although it should be as warm as the south of France. That there are no towns except for 4 or 5 near the Eastern Ocean, and that some of the Chinese have built close to China for political reasons. That the remainder of the Greater Tartary there are only a few located in the Bushehr, Turkestan, and Charamis. That a reason for this extreme cold is found in the nature of the terrain, which is nitrous, full of saltpeter and sandy, as well as its elevation. So mountains, Atlantic, the physical qualities of the ground plus the elevation, combine that to the elevation, the height causes the coldness, right? Father Vespians have found that at certain spots 8 leagues north of the Great Wall, towards the source of the Camverem River, right, that rose 3,000 geometric feet above the coast near of the ocean near Peking, Beijing, right? That this elevation is the cause for the fact that although almost all the great rivers of Asia have their sources in the countryside, it nevertheless lacks water, so that it can be inhabited only near the rivers and lakes. So that's this physical idea of the territory, the height of the thing. Even though all the things find the sources of the rivers of China come from that area still can't do because of its height, right? Um, it lacks water, so it can be uninhabited near the rivers and lakes. These facts stated, these facts stated, I reason thus: Asia has no temperature zone properly so called, and that the places situated in a very cold climate there are immediately adjacent to those that are in a very warm climate. That is Turkey, Persia, and the Mongol Empire, China, Korea, and Japan. In Europe, on the other hand, the temperate zone is very broad, although the climate within it are very different from one another. There is no relation between the climate of Spain and Italy and that of Norway and Sweden. but in the climate there grows colder gradually as one goes south to north, approximately in proportion to the latitude of each country. It happens that there each country is very like its neighbor, that there is not a noticeable difference between them, and that, just as I said, the temperate zone is very broad. For this, it follows that in Asia, the strong and the weak nations face each other. Brave and active, the brave and active peoples, the brave and active warrior people are immediately adjacent to effeminate, lazy, and timid people. Therefore, one must be conquered and the other must conquer. In Europe, on the other hand, strong nations face strong. Those are adjacent have almost the same amount of courage. This is the major reason for the weakness of Asia and the strength of Europe, for liberty of Europe and the servitude of Asia. A cause that I think has never before been observed. This is why liberty never increases in Asia, whereas in Europe it increases or decreases according to the circumstance. Although in Muscovy nobility was reduced to servitude by one of its princes, one will always see there the mark of impatience that the southern climates do not produce. Did we see not an aristocratic government established there briefly? Although another kingdom in the north has lost its laws, one can trust to the climate that it has not lost them irrecoverably. So that even though they lose their laws, right, they will not lose them irrecoverably. Now, this is interesting. Now, this chapter is this one. This chapter heights really ties up the question of it moves us by the interaction of climate to territoriality. Okay, so climate. He's going to explain. This all this is about the question of despotic laws, right? Why are there political servitude? And now what he's doing is he's explaining features, and he's also explaining the features of dominant warrior people next to, like Asia, the strong is adjacent right to the weak, and therefore the same. But in Europe, it's strong against strong. And there's a balance of power, right? Now in many ways, he's echoing what Aristotle says, but he expands on it. And Montesquieu here is, that you can find this little gem in Aristotle's Politics, Book XVII, where he talks about the difference between the Asian peoples and the Greeks, right? And that the Greeks have spirit and the Asians lack it. And therefore, this tension of this, and I think that's courage is meant, right? Spirit, lack of courage. Now, the only question that we can add to this is how technology will change this. As technology changes the ability of climate, our ability to, in other words, at the time of the founding fathers, much of the South was only, it was unlivable for most Europeans, and if they lived there, it was very hard for them to engage in labor. That's why slavery was dependent upon them. D.C. was you did not want to be in Washington D.C. in the 1800s or early 1900s because the 1800s and that because it was just so oppressive during the summer. You had malaria. I know there was malaria even in places like Philadelphia. Malaria was constant. Okay, malaria and heat disease. Even places like Philadelphia was humid, hot because of the terrain. Um, uh, uh, Parts of the South was really you couldn't you needed to it was very going to be unlikely to have massive populations that more than it was the population that the European populations that wanted to farm or to do things like this often were uh, say above the Mason Dixon line for that very reason. But as the ability to change the climate by changing the water, desalinating, things like this. The technology changed the environment, the territory and environment of the territory, deforestation, things like this, and the controls of rivers, controlling rivers, recording, allowing for more to be arable. Well, what does this do? This really then changes a lot of what is in other words, it alters this kind of question. What happens when you add things like air conditioning, right? In other words, the Southwest, like places like Arizona, New Mexico, and even Southern California, would be uninhabitable because the climate area. But with air conditioning, they become habitable. Same thing with Florida. Parts of Florida would be uninhabitable. The South too. The South, the humidity and the heatness. But with this allows for it to have a moderate climate, artificial moderate climate. How will the artificial moderate climate change our behaviors, change the kind of people that they are, and change the quality of this? Now he's saying that this. Now the argument here is that well, what now this is something that Darwin will add another thing. That's saying, well, after thousands of years, certain traits will happen, but still we're evolving and adapting to environment. So now the situation is that when you take a situation that people who had inclinations to certain things and move them to different climates now, and particularly one that's conditioned, then does it change? Does it adapt? Yes, even the idea of the climate that is air conditioning, but you still have to go outside in the heat. So you can do it in buildings, but you can't maybe live there. But if you had to go out in the heat and do it, it does still in other words, as we get into climate suits and things like that, but this would require aspects of technology that would do things. I remember the position of, let's say, the so-called in Star Trek, particularly New Generation and Deep Space Nine, the Breen, right, who lived in, they had to live in cold climates, that in a certain atmosphere. So if they lived in their suits, that they maintained the climate that they were suitable for, right? So this is how we can understand that technology can even alter that kind of reality, right? So that does lead us to a question, but that the way a people has been formed and shaped in its mores, that is also an aspect here that is implied here. So consequence six, a consequence of this. What we have just said agrees with the events of history. Asia has been subjugated 13 times, 12 times by the people of the north, twice by those of the south. In the distant past, the Scythians conquered it 3 times, and the Medes and the Persians each once. Then the Greeks, then the Arabs, then the Mongol Turks and Tartars and Persians and Afghans. I may speak only of Upper Asia and say nothing of the invasions made in the southern part, which has constantly suffered great revolutions. In Europe, on the other hand, we only know 4 great changes since the establishment of the Greek and Phoenician colonies. The first caused by the Roman conquest, the second by the inundation of barbarians who destroyed these same Romans, the third by the victories of Charlemagne, and the last by the Norman invasions. And upon examining these closely, and I think he's missing one. I would even say the Viking things, but maybe these are um, maybe combination of barbarians who destroyed the Romans, but there's barbarian invasions of the Vikings and Anglo-Saxons, right, into Britain at this time, at the same time as before Charlemagne, right? So again, maybe destroyed the Romans and the barbarians keep on moving through, right? And then Charlemagne's around 1000, but Charlemagne really didn't do anything except establish the kingdom of the French and Germans, right? The Norman invasion establishes really England, Britain, but also establishes a little bit of the Naples and the southern area, and you know. Um, And upon examining these closely, one will see that the very changes forced the spread gently throughout all the parts of Europe, so that these things change the other thing there. One knows the difficulties the Romans had in conquering Europe and the ease which they invaded Asia. One knows the pains northern people had to take to overthrow the Northern Empire, Roman Empire, the wars of the wars and works of Charlemagne, the various enterprises of Normans. The destroyers were constantly destroyed. In other words, so therefore, in Asia, a conqueror would shape long periods of time, so had many conquests. And in Europe, it was very difficult to establish an order. And it was established, but then even those orders established were destroyed. Chapter 5, that when the people of Northern Asia and those of Northern Europe conquered, the effects of their conquests were not the same. So therefore, even when the Asians conquer us and the Europeans conquer, their effects are not the same. The people of Northern Europe have conquered as free men. The people of Northern Asia have conquered as slaves and have been victorious only for a master. So the Europeans conquer as free men, and the Northern Asian peoples of Northern conquers as slaves and have been victorious only for a master. The reason is that the Tartar people, Asia's natural conquerors, have become slaves themselves. They constantly conquer Southern Asia. They form empires, but the part of the conquering nation that remains in the country is subject to a great master who is despotic in the south, who also wants to be in the north, and who, with arbitrary power over conquered subjects, claim it also over the conquering subjects. This can be seen today in the vast country called China Tartary, where the empire governs almost as despotically as China itself, and which he extends every day by his conquests. One can see in the history of China that the emperor sent colonies of Chinese into Tartary. These Chinese became Tatars and the mortal enemies of China, but that did not keep them from carrying the spirit of the Chinese into Tartary. Often a part of the Tartar nation that conquered was itself driven out. Went back into the desert with the spirit of servitude acquired in the climate of slavery. In other words, even though the Tartars were driven out, but they acquired slavery while there. The history of China furnishes us with a great example, as does our ancient history. This is why the genius of the Tartars, or the Gata nation, Geta nation, had always been similar to that of the Asian empire, the empires of Asia. The Tatars of the Geta nation have always been similar to that of the Asian empire. The people in the latter are governed by the Kudjul, the Tartar peoples by the Lash. The spirit of Europe has always been contrary to these Moors. And what the people of Asia have always called punishment, the people of Europe have always called gross offense. When the Tartars destroyed the Greek Empire, they established servitude and despotism in the conquered countries. When the Goths conquered the Roman Empire, they founded monarchy and liberty everywhere. I do not know if the famous Rudbeck, who in his Atlantia has so praised Scandinavia, has mentioned the great prerogative that should put the nations inhabiting it above all the other peoples of the earth. That it is that they have been the source of European liberty. So Scandinavia, right, the Nordic, that is of almost all of it that there is today among men. The Goth Jordanes has called Northern Europe the manufactory of the human species. I shall rather call it the manufactory of the instruments that break the change forged in the South. So the South, in other words, the Goth, the Jordanes, called Northern Europe a manufacture of the human species. But Montesquieu is going to say, no, it is the manufacturers of the instruments that break the change that it forms in the southern climate. It is here that are formed the valiant nations who go out of their own countries to destroy tyrants and slaves, and to teach men that as nature has made them equal, reason can make them dependent only for the sake of their happiness. So this is that line. This is that great line. In other words, he's going to say the Scandinavian or Germanic or Scandinavian. This is the source of the basis of liberty of the Europeans, their spirit, and that. But this Europe is the engine not of the human species, but a manufacturer of the things that break the change forms in the South. He says here, right? This is from the valiant nations who go out of their own country, destroy the tyrants and slay the Greeks, the Asian barbarians, the Romans, then the northern peoples like this, right? Later, right? To teach men that nature has made them equal, reason can make them dependent only for the sake of their happiness, their well-being. You can only be dependent for the benefit of your benefit. Chapter 6. I'm going to need some more water for a second. Hold on, my throat is drying up, and that's not good. An additional cause, the additional physical cause for the servitude of Asia and the liberty of England. In Asia, one has always seen great empires. In Europe, they were never able to continue to exist. This is because it is because the Asia we know has broader plains. It is cut into larger parts by seas, and as it is more to the south, its streams dry up more easily. Its mountain barriers are less covered with snow. It has smaller rivers, form slighter barriers. Therefore, power should always be despotic in Asia. In other words, it's a combination of climate, geography, servitude. For if servitude there did not were not extreme, there would immediately be division that the nature of the country could not endure. There was the division that the environment, nature of the country of Asia that could not endure. In Europe, the natural divisions form many medium-sized states in which the government of law is not incompatible with the maintenance of the state. On the other hand, they are so favorable to this that without laws, this state falls into decadence and becomes inferior to all the others. This is what has formed a genius of liberty. In other words, the environment of the climate and this of the. In other words, this is what has formed a genius for liberty, which makes it difficult to subjugate each part and to put under a foreign force other than by law what that and by what is useful to its commerce. So therefore, this is what, in other words, that the division of the territory, the natural divisions in Europe, the rivers and streams in the structure, the geography gives natural divisions that allows us these things to form natural boundaries. And that these boundaries ensure that they can't easily just create one thing, right? In other words, the lack, and therefore they put limits to what can grow, right? And that so therefore, if what happens is that without the laws of that maintain without the incompatible maintenance of the state. On the other hand, they are favorable, so favorable that that is without laws, this state falls into decadence and becomes inferior to the others. They're not just simply conquest of them, only inferior to them, weaker than them, not necessarily enslaved. And this is what formed the genius of liberty, which makes it very difficult to subjugate each part and to put under a foreign force other than by laws and by what is useful for its commerce. By contrast, in Asia, there reigns a spirit of servitude that has never left it. And in all the histories of this country, it is not possible to find a single trait marking a free soul. One will never see there anything but the heroism of servitude. Okay, this is the problem. Now, the question is can technology and changes of ecology change this? Could a Chinese person who lived in a European culture so adopt the attitudes and courage, and that comes back? What does what does the interaction of these different peoples and the imitations of different people change this? Okay, Montesquieu really doesn't hit on this yet. I think that's the way you'd have to expand on Montesquieu. Chapter 7 on Africa and on America. This is what I can say about Asia and Europe. Africa has a climate like that of Southern Asia, and has this, and it has the same servitude. America, destroyed and nearly repopulated by the nations of Europe and Africa, can scarcely demonstrate its own genius today. But what we know of its former history is quite conformity with our principles. So that Asia, in other words, Africa follows the rules of Asia. The geography of Africa follows the rules of Asia, and therefore you get the same situation as servitude is as in Asia. In America, well, this was depopulated and repopulated by the peoples of Europe and Africa, so that we don't know its own genius. But what we know of their history, we can't know that the American. The Americans themselves don't know what they are, but we can do it from the farmer history to understand the indigenous people of America, what happened. We can get some clue in what we see there among the tribes of the Indians, and the things of this follows to his principle of climate and that, right? And liberty and servitude. In chapter 8, on the climate of empire. And this ends chapter 8 ends the book on the climate of empire. One of the consequences of what we've just said is that it is important to have a very great prince to choose well the seat of his empire. He who puts it in the south will run the risk of losing the north, and he who will put it in the north will preserve the south. I do not speak of particular cases, as mechanics has its frictions and often change or check its theoretical effects. Politics, too, has its frictions. So this is very interesting. Now, this is a very interesting argument. It says that this argument here is empire. You need to pick your capital well. An emperor must keep his capital well. That he must put it in the place. If he puts it in the south, he'll lose all the time. He will lose control. If he puts it in the north, he will win. Now, of course, there might be issues. Particular situations, in particular cases, this might differ. Why? Because there might be specific things that change or check the general theory, that the general thing pattern that he's seeing here. And he says politics too, like in any theoretical thing, politics too has its frictions. What are the frictions in politics? These specific things, these factors that work against a general trait. Okay. And that therefore, instead of being the norm, the trait does not follow the norm. It's an outlier. It doesn't behave. This is that famous thing in distribution statistics. We have what we say, things that follow the pattern versus those that are outliers, right? The outliers are either extreme in one or the other. Either it doesn't disprove the pattern. It's just that the conditions there, if something is affecting it, that it's acting completely different. That the pattern, there is an influence or something, but it's not acting the same way, and therefore there's some condition there, either accelerating or deaccelerating it. So therefore, some specific thing can interfere with the logic of a pattern, of a cause-effect relationship. And this is what he says here in this sense. Okay, this is a short one. I can see everyone is saying, "Oh, this was short today." If you like it, put the like button, share it. Share this with a friend. Share it on social media. Get it out there. If you have not subscribed, subscribe. Oh, another thing is I forgot. Oh, does. If you have any comments, put the comments below. Put the comments below, and I will respond to them when I see them. Again, subscribe. Get others to subscribe. Please, let's grow the channel a little bit. But if you didn't like the video, okay, you can thumb down it. But tell why in the comments, what's wrong, and maybe we can learn from it. Maybe I got something wrong, and you can correct me. We can all benefit from this, right? This is this is what we do in that sense. If you want to follow me on social media, the links are below. If you want to help me, if you want to help me contribute to do these things by contributing. You can do so financially through Subscribestar or Patreon. You can always search me out and send a check to me. I would gladly accept it. Oops, bad boy. But that's true. I would gladly. I think Patreon. I don't have much of Patreon support. I understand because you don't do anything for that. Maybe I don't have a big enough audience. I only have, we get there's about 300 people here, but only about 20% regularly watch it. Okay, 20% regularly join it, participate. I should have more. Again, the topic is. I'm not that bad. I'm not that bad or that entertaining. Maybe the people aren't interested in these things. Maybe I'm not that smacky. I'm no Styx Hexinghammer or other people, but I think this might be some worth and some interest. Well, that's it. We do these videos normally on Mondays and Wednesdays. during June, I might have a couple extra on a Friday when I know we have my live stream, but I'm having live streaming problems, and until I fix, I'm planning on I'm spending on this month of June trying to fix my live stream problems and restart in July live streams. Um, Also on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I might be doing something special. I was doing Schmidt, and now I might do Koja. I think I probably will do Koja, Kozhev's notion of authority, but we don't know. So these are something different on the term of schedule. So please join us. See you again, and see you again next time when we will turn to which should be chapter, book 18 about terrain. This should be our you know interesting, continuing what we did here. Okie dokie. Take care. Have a good day. Bye.